Okay, I just see a message that we are live. Hello and welcome to the 1960s Project. We're going to give everybody a few minutes to get in and join us. Uh, if this is your first time, you're in for a real treat. Some of you have been with me all month. Actually, the first session for Women's History Month was Gina Page and my sister Okella, and I've been here the rest of the time. So, welcome. This is season 2, week 11 of the 1960s Project. This is week 4 of the series. It's called HerStories of the 1960s. So, we're celebrating women because, it's Women History Month. The 1960s Project is a wonderful place where we share small memories and large thoughts. I am Faye Page Edwards. I don't know if I said that. And I am the sister of Jerome Page. Jerome is one of my 2 big brothers. And normally he is in this seat, but because it's Women's History Month, we've been putting women in this seat. Before we get started, I have a couple announcements. First, if you were in high school in the 1960s and you have thoughts or memories and you would like to be on our show, let me know and I'll hook you up. Also, you guys know how social media works. In order to be a success, you need likes, you need followers. So please like our Facebook page. On YouTube, we need you to do 2 things. We need you to like and subscribe. And then, of course, shares are another way to be hugely successful on social media. So please share us all over your social media pages. The 1960s Project is celebrating Women's History Month, and today I will be chatting with Dr. Esther Mackintosh about her 1960s memories and thoughts. I strongly encourage you to read her blog. It's very, very interesting. So, Ty, let's bring up Dr. Mackintosh. Esther, hello.
Hello. So nice to see you.
Yes. So we're both here today because of Jerome. So why don't you start by telling us how long you've known Jerome?
I maybe have lost count of how long I've known Jerome now, but I met Jerome sometime in the 90s when he was the co-chair of the DC Humanities Council. And I was working at that time, later became president of the Federation of State Humanities Councils, which is the membership association for all of the councils. So since I live in DC, I considered the DC Council to be my home council. So that gave me a special connection with Jerome. Even after he left to being chair, we would see each other at DC Council events, and we've just stayed in touch all these years.
Yeah, Jerome won't let you go.
No.
So you live in DC, and DC is often called Chocolate City. Now, while the population of white people obviously has increased over time, there was a time when, hands down, DC was considered the blackest city in the country. You have written about your childhood, Iowa, a dairy farm, and you describe that community as, quote, unremittingly white. Were there no Black people there?
There were no Black people. No. What counted for diversity in our hometown was we had one Polish family, and they were recognizable by their name, and we had a Greek family, and they were recognizable by their name. But no, it was a very white community. I was talking with my sister about this just a couple of days ago. And I said, am I missing anybody? Am I not remembering anybody who was of color in our community? And when was the first time you ever became acquainted with somebody who was Black? And she said, through you when you went to college.
Okay, I think that qualifies as unremittingly white.
I think so.
So tell us a little bit more about Livermore, Iowa, Humble, Iowa, and Sioux City, Iowa. What kind of place was it?
Livermore was a very, and still is, very tiny town. When I grew up there, there were about 600 people. Now the population has dropped to under 400, I understand, from the most recent census. The town was 2 miles from our farm. It was walkable. And the next biggest town was 10 miles away, and that was Humboldt, and they had 5,000 people. So that was a big town for us. Mm-hmm. Sioux City, where I went to college, was about 2.5 hours away. And that was a much larger place, right on the Missouri River at the far western side of Iowa.
A real city, huh?
A real city, yeah.
Well, you know, before the Civil War, Iowa was a free state, and it was settled both by abolitionists as well as those in favor of enslavement. And in fact, Iowa was a crucial part of the Underground Railroad, and the abolitionist John Brown spent a lot of time there. Did you learn that in your social studies classes in Iowa?
I did not learn that. I learned it later, but I did not learn it then. We did, however, learn a bit about Native American presence in that area. But no, didn't hear anything about John Brown.
Nothing about John Brown. You describe a very close-knit family on the dairy farm, and I have to say it sounded a little like Little House on the Prairie. Talk about your family life and what you did on a daily basis.
Yeah. My father was a dairy farmer, which meant that he milked cows every morning at 6 o'clock and every evening at 6 o'clock. Throughout my life, I never did get conscripted into the morning milking, but throughout high school, I went home every single day that I didn't have after school activities and changed my clothes and went out and helped my father in the barn. We were a very tight-knit family, honestly, although there were 5 of us and there was 18 years between the oldest and the youngest. So we were a very close family and remain so, but there was a big spread in age in our family.
Mm-hmm. You said that you were nurtured academically your entire life, which, you know, in the 1960s, that wasn't typical for girls.
Correct.
Was an exception, or was that true for your friends as well?
It was somewhat true for my friends, but I do think that my family was actually a little bit more committed to, I do believe that my parents, probably from the time they got married, were unified in their commitment to having their children get a good education. So, and they were great readers. I think there were more books in our house than I think in most of the homes that I visited when I was growing up. So there was a strong commitment to reading and to education for sure. It was a town in which a good number of parents sent their kids to college, but I don't know that the commitment was quite as strong as it was with my parents.
You mentioned there was no TV in your house.
No TV for the entire time until I left school. I don't think that my parents got a TV until I was in graduate school. And then it was because my younger sister said, yeah, but I'm here all by myself. I deserve to have a TV.
What happens with the youngest? They get more stuff.
That's right.
So talk to you at the 1960s Project. We are committed to calling the names of our ancestors. We consider that to be very, very powerful. Talk to me about your mother. Who are you the daughter of, the granddaughter of?
Yeah. I'm the granddaughter of Grace. I'm the daughter of Grace and proud to be so. Her mother's name was Cecile, as it's spelled, but we always knew her as Cecil, and she hated that pronunciation, but that's what everyone always called her. But yes, my mother was Grace. The story about that is that at my father's funeral, the minister said, "Our sympathies today are with Grace, there has never been a better named person."
Wow.
And I believe that is true. Mother was pure grace.
It's pure grace. Yeah. You mentioned that before she was married, that she was a librarian.
Yes, right. She worked actually in the Humboldt Library. That's where her family was from. She grew up in Humboldt, or actually Dakota City, which is a adjoining town. And she worked at the Humboldt Library in the children's department. So my father used to joke about how in the Humboldt paper, they had a picture of Mother at one point, and the caption said, "Tells stories."
Well, that partly accounts maybe for her commitment to reading in your family. Yeah. She was also a leader in the church.
Definitely, yes. She was a leader of a number of committees in the church. I think she was on the church board at some point. So was my father. She was very, very, very active in the church women's group, but a leader. And she was also, as it happens, she was also at a later point when I was in college, she became the chair of the local library board. So Livermore had a library despite being such a small town, and the library is still one of the only going concerns in that town.
Wow, nice. Talk to me about her fame as a letter writer.
Mother wrote to each of her children when we left home. She wrote to each of her children every week. And she wrote to many, many, many other people, and everybody loved getting a letter from Mother, and she was a very good writer. To this day, I get letters from friends of mine who will say to me, "I've been sorting some things, I've been going through some old papers, and I found this letter that your mother wrote to me, and I thought you would like to have it."
Oh.
And indeed, I do love having all those letters.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote about daily life when she wrote, but she wrote about it in a beautiful way.
Yeah, sounds like almost like a journal, sort of.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah, that was before social media, and that's how you shared what was going on in your life.
That's right.
Yeah. You said that many other women influenced you, and one in particular was your Aunt Alice.
Yes, she was actually my grandmother's sister. She never married. She lived as long as I was alive. She lived with a woman named Lou, and they were so established that in our family they were known as Aunt Alice and Lou. And separately, we called her Aunt Lou all the time. They met, I believe, when they both worked in a women's apparel store in Humboldt. And later they moved to Rochester, Minnesota, and they also worked in a women's apparel store there. But Aunt Alice, my mother once said about Aunt Alice that people loved being around her. They just loved being in her presence. Mm-hmm. And I think people felt that same way about my mother, but that mother said she always loved that about Aunt Alice, that she made everybody feel comfortable.
Yeah, aunts who arrive are always a source of celebration. Yes. We all have that favorite aunt, or maybe that aunt that's just a little special that upsets everybody, and we just, and we just love them dearly as well. Yep. Yeah. Now you mentioned that you were a daddy's girl, and your father, I think, had some very specific political views.
He did. Yep.
Were you always in agreement or disagreement with those views?
You know, I would say probably almost through high school, I mainly agreed with my parents. They were both Republican. Dad was a stronger Republican than Mother was. but they were moderate Republicans, and so I was able to go along with their views very easily through high school. It was in college that we began to see things a little bit differently. But they were always willing to listen. So, yeah.
Yeah, my sister Susie just put in the chat. It sounds giving a shout out to Panks, and Panks are
Yes.
professional aunts, no kids, and what a wonderful role they play in the life of the children in their family.
Yep.
So your dad, though, he was pretty outspoken in the community about
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
his political views, to the point that you mentioned he tried to give the ministers some direction.
Yes. For reasons that I still can't fathom. And I didn't know this at the time. I only learned about this actually in recent years from my brother. But I knew as a Republican, he was not going to vote for Kennedy anyway. But I did not know that he felt so strongly about a Catholic being president. And he felt strongly enough that my brother told me he at one point tried to talk the minister into encouraging the people in the congregation not to vote for Kennedy on that basis. And I did not know that at the time. I wouldn't have been happy about that at the time.
But oh my, the threat of a Catholic. Oh,
yeah, really.
that's a threat today. Yeah, yeah. So in high school, you go on a trip, and it sounds like in your blog that trip sort of gave you sensory overload. You want to share how you felt about going out into the world on that trip?
Absolutely. So this was a group of Methodist high school students from 2 or 3 different churches. So it wasn't just our church, it was kids from the whole district. There were probably 30 of us on this trip, and we went out on a bus. So we drove all night long from Iowa out to Washington, D.C. Arriving in Washington was a revelation, I will say. The monuments were just overwhelming to me. Wandering around those streets of DC and then later New York City, same. But what I remember most really was Washington, DC. And I think it had to do with Washington being such a city of monuments and feeling so strongly the history of the place and actually the history of the whole country as it's portrayed in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, you said that was your first tug in terms of thinking that maybe you would leave home.
Yeah. The first glimpse that there was a world out there I might actually be able to negotiate. Yeah.
I envision you as this very studious farm girl. When you were in high school, about that time in my Black neighborhood, there were several songs on the charts about doing the jerk. And I was faithfully practicing my moves. We were kind of crooning to Ooh Baby Baby with Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Well, what about on the farm? Were y'all having any fun out there?
We were having a lot of fun out there. Probably wasn't quite the same. There's a standard story in my family that my 2 older sisters taught my brother to dance down in the barn while they were helping Dad because he was getting ready for his first school dance. I don't think anybody was around that taught me to dance. And I wasn't much of a dancer, but I have to say what I remember is the junior and senior prom, and what we were looking for is those crooning songs.
Yeah. To hug up a little bit. I know. So when you go to college, Talk about how you made the decision to go to college and why you went to that particular college.
Yeah. All three of my siblings before me had gone to Morningside College. Not all of them graduated from Morningside, but my second sister Phyllis did. Nancy went there for 2 years, and then she transferred to get a teaching certificate at a college in Cedar Falls. My brother transferred and got a dairy plant management degree after a couple of years at Morningside. But all of us had been at Morningside. I had visited that campus, and because it was a Methodist-related school, they were very interested in students like me. So someone from the admissions office actually came to our farm to visit with me and my parents about me coming to Morningside. It was not a hard sell at all. I already had it in my head that that's where I wanted to go. Mm-hmm. And that was a good decision. It was exactly right for me.
Great, great. So when I was in college, the music of our background was James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And it wasn't unusual as you pass through the dorm to hear that anthem being played.
Right.
I'm going to guess that might not have been the case where you went to school.
It wasn't, although we got some of that. There was a lot of protest songs, especially in my junior and senior year at Morningside. We were getting, Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and a lot of that. But in terms of popular music, yeah, we did get James Brown, and I became such a strong Dionne Warwick fan that one of her albums that came out when I was, I think, a junior in college, I did eventually know every single word to every single song on that album.
Every nuance, I understand.
Everyone.
Now in college, lo and behold, you encounter Black people.
Yeah.
There's some Black students there.
Yes.
Tell me, couldn't have been very many.
No.
So talk about the experience of getting to know these students, or if you did get to know those students.
Right. Yeah. When I think back, you are so right that there weren't very many. And when I think back, I think it must have been very, very hard for them because they were coming into a landscape that was very well established for the people who were already there. Mm-hmm. And I think looking back, I think it must have been hard. In particular, I got to know a couple of students that had come out from Chicago. And I'm not sure exactly what prompted them. I think probably the admissions office also recruited them. They also probably went to Chicago and offered them a good place at Morningside. But in particular, one of these students I became friends with, and we had many, many conversations. He was a real education for me. But on the other hand, I think I was sort of an education for him too, because he could not imagine an upbringing like mine, being so rural. We were mutually amazed, yes. But we had many, many really great conversations. He was the person who introduced me to the autobiography of Malcolm X, strongly encouraged me to read that, which I did, sitting on a pier at a lake where I had a summer job after my junior year in college. And that book was really a revelation to me. And so is my friend Abdu.
Yeah. Any particular memories about, or was it just the entirety of the story that was so astounding?
The autobiography?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it was the entirety. But again, reading about his early beginnings and then the transformation that he underwent, it was every single word in that book was pretty much illuminating to me.
Okay, so now you're tiptoeing along the path to being woke. I don't know if woke was a word then.
I don't believe so.
Did you share your new interest in being woke with your siblings? Did you talk about what you were encountering with all the people back on the dairy farm?
I did talk a lot with my family about the things that I was encountering at college and the things that I was thinking about. And um, my two older sisters were married by that time. Actually, my brother was too. So they were very busy with family life and jobs and raising children. But I just don't remember a split with them because of different experiences that I was having from what they were struggling with in their lives.
Yeah, yeah. Was Vietnam a big topic on campus? It probably was.
Huge, huge.
Mm.
By the time I got into my junior and senior years at college, this was a very, very big thing. And many of the young men in my class were really concerned about the draft.
Sure.
So there were lots of conversations about that, lots of late night coffee shop conversations, a lot of angst, a lot of hand wringing.
Mhm.
One of my classmates actually did leave for Canada, and I don't know that he ever came back. I think he died in Canada.
Oh, wow.
And several of my other classmates actually were drafted to and went to Vietnam. I think several of them were lucky enough that they were in non-combat positions.
Mhm.
But it was really a source of great distress for most of the males in my class. For the females, because we cared about the males.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned in your blog bringing a friend home who engaged your father in a very interesting conversation
Right,
about Vietnam.
right. He was one of the people who was really most troubled about it because he was also he was very, very principled. And he didn't want to make a decision about this that was not really true to his beliefs. So at the time that he came back to the farm with me for a weekend and had these conversations with my father, he was at that time really considering conscientious objector status. But he wasn't sure that he was a true conscientious objector. He did not believe in this war, but he wasn't sure that he could really make the claim that he was totally a conscientious objector. But he felt trapped. He couldn't find another way to do this. So he and my father had good conversations about that. And I think I wasn't in on those conversations, but I think Dad really listened to him and was really influenced by
That.
hearing from Dave.
Sure, that often happens. Exposure and conversations can be very, very enlightening. So
Yeah.
you describe a life in the church.
Yep.
Your father is active enough to be telling the minister what to preach. Did the 60s affect your faith in any way?
When I was growing up in the Methodist Church, it was a church, I think it has changed somewhat now. I'm not active in the Methodist Church now, but my siblings are. And the Methodist Church, since I was really active in my school years, I think has changed maybe several times. But when I was growing up, we considered that the Methodist Church was a church that cared very deeply about social issues and about playing an active role in daily life and in national life and public life. So actually, the college did not cause me to drift away from my religious upbringing, because I felt as though my religious upbringing encouraged me to really care about these social issues. And that was it was a very comfortable place for me to be, not in contrast at all.
How wonderful to have a faith that's empowering. It's nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So feminism, um, rights. Were you taking a stand on any of those issues?
You know, those weren't such issues, but I'll tell you two funny things. And Faye, you and I didn't even talk about these two things. So one of those things was that when I was in college, I was having a conversation once when I was home with my mother. And she was telling me about, I believe, someone who was running for state legislature in their state. Mother was a big supporter of hers. And she said, in the course of this conversation, she said, she's also, she is also a liberated woman.
Mhm.
And I paused for a moment there and then said, she's comparing her to me. And I hadn't explicitly been thinking of myself that way. So mother got there first. Mother was first thinking of me as an independent woman, I guess, before I was. And that's
Recognize it.
the other thing that I remember so clearly is that when I was graduating, when I was just about to graduate from Morningside, I wanted to get a summer job there in Sioux City and stay in Sioux City for that summer. And so I was looking around town, some jobs around town, and I remember so clearly applying for a job at a bank and being interviewed by the bank manager. And at the end of our conversation, which was good, I didn't get a job there, but it was a decent conversation. But at the end, he said to me, "So what are you planning to do next?" And I said, "I'm going to graduate school." And he said, "Huh,
Huh.
I I thought the aim of young women going to college was to find a husband."
Was to get their MRS, huh?
And, I did at least have the presence of mind to say to him, "That's interesting, because my observation was that it was the men in my class who were more concerned about getting married, because after college, they weren't going to have anybody to look after them."
And they wanted that woman to help in terms of their whole career path.
Absolutely.
Their
Yep.
home and hearth, as they said.
Yep.
So in college, you were elected to student government.
Right.
In your blog, you talk about this incredibly shy child who cried every day at kindergarten because she couldn't bear not to be at home. So, talk to us about your leadership transformation.
I do think in retrospect that this began earlier than I had thought. And I think it began with the model that we had at home. Our parents were so active in the community. And I think I took that as the right thing to do. So I did begin, I think, kind of unconsciously, really, to encourage my own leadership skills in high school, just because it was a way of contributing. And that became maybe more pronounced when I got into college. I wanted to be involved in things. And yes, and so that involved sometimes just taking leadership.
Yeah.
I was also, in addition to being on the student council, I was a resident assistant in our dorm, and I think I actually did become the council chair of the dorm among the students.
You were Grace's daughter, so that
Yeah, right.
had to take charge. And
That's right.
yeah, her leadership inspired you to do the same.
Yeah.
So, what did you major in college?
I had a double major in English and German, and I minored in history. So this was the beginning of my humanities career for sure.
Why
And I
German?
didn't intend to major in English when I went off to college, but I just found that the English classes that I took were just my home. That's where I felt right.
What about German? Why would you major in German?
when my when I was registering for my very first classes at Morningside as a freshman, we were required to take a language, and the person registering me said, "What kind of which language do you want to take?" And I had not thought about that at all, but my father's mother was German, and so I said, German.
Wow. Well, we who have had our native languages erased can only marvel at the privilege of spontaneously deciding to major in your native language.
Yeah.
Uh, did you ever use your German in any way?
I didn't. And for that reason, I was always kind of sorry that I didn't take Spanish, because I could have been using that all along. But no, I didn't really. I will tell you that after I graduated, the summer after I graduated from college, a friend and I went to Europe, and we did a whirlwind trip. And one of the countries we went to was Germany. And on a bus, I tried to speak to someone in German. And he finally said to me, "Do you speak English?"
Yeah.
So apparently my 4 years of German at Morningside didn't really help me that much.
Conversational. Not at,
Right.
not at all. So you graduate and then you embark on a wonderful career. You talk about your early life on the farm. Everyone worked. Everyone worked really, really hard.
Right.
So talk to us about the route from milking cows, and I think you had a job detasseling corn, to Dr. Mackintosh, friend of Jerome Page.
Right. So Faye, do you
Mhm.
know about detasseling corn?
I have no idea. Would you like to?
Iowa was obviously a big corn state, and one of the things that Iowa did was produce seed corn, hybrid seed corn, which
Seed
meant
corn? Okay.
Yep, which meant that you would go into a field that had two different kinds of corn planted. And in order for one of those kinds of corn to pollinate the other, you had to take out the tassel of the corn to be pollinated.
Who
Yeah.
knew?
Yeah, who knew? It was the hottest, dirtiest job you can imagine. But it brought in money.
It brought in money, taught you to work, and you've come a long way, Dr. McIntosh. You want to talk to us about, give us some tidbits of your career path?
Sure. Yeah. When I got through with my coursework on the PhD, and my plan had been very loosely to teach in college. That's why I was getting a PhD in English. But before I even got through my coursework in graduate school, I realized that there was such a glut at that time of PhDs that there were not going to be teaching jobs. In fact, the people that I was going through these courses with at Kansas State joked about how there were so many PhDs available for English teaching jobs at that time that surely what any school did, no matter where you were or how large you were, what you could do was go through all the applications you got and throw out everything that wasn't an Ivy League school, and you'd still have plenty to choose from. So I realized that I was going to have to come up with something else. And I thought an English major, well, maybe publishing would be a next step.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved to Boston because my then partner, my always partner, was living there. And I got a job actually as a secretary for Horticulture Magazine.
Horticulture.
And just Horticulture Magazine, yep. and worked my way up through it was a small staff, but I did eventually work my way up to being the editor of the magazine when the previous editor left. And I did that for a bit, and then I moved to Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
Because again, my partner was working there, and I found that I could get a job in an audiovisual department at a hospital there, a specialist hospital. So I spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia as a script writer. Didn't really write many scripts that got produced because they couldn't pull together all the pieces that were needed. So I ended up writing a lot of articles for an Arabic newspaper in Riyadh. And when I came back, I again worked for a magazine here in Washington, D.C. called Science 80. Changed its name every year, and that was a science magazine for lay audiences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That magazine was published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, but they were not accustomed to publishing a popular science magazine, and they got panicked when it wasn't making any money. So after 6 years, they sold it to a magazine in New York. And that's when I went to the Federation of State Humanities Councils, returned to the humanities.
Yes, 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 yes. And you eventually went back home. Talk about your journey back to Iowa.
When I was working for the Federation, the Morningside was celebrating its 100th anniversary, and I had stayed in touch with a lot of people at Morningside. So, but because I was working in the humanities, the head of the English department, when it came their turn to select one of the convocation speakers for that 100th anniversary year, he invited me to come back and give a convocation speech. And that was really, I had been in touch with people at Morningside, but going back and giving that speech was really my first time to really strongly reconnect with Morningside.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You go home. How
Yep.
So do you but you didn't actually move back to Livermore.
I did not. No, I never have moved back to live in Iowa since I left Iowa for graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
But I go back regularly. Of course, I have not this year.
Sure.
Exactly. But I do go back regularly. We still own an acreage of our farm where I grew up. So, you know, that girl that didn't want to go to kindergarten had to hang on to that farm.
Had to be able to get back home very easily. Yes, yes.
So we do go back, and we have family reunions still at the farm, and go back regularly.
Nice, nice. So talk to me about 2020. It was a pivotal year for many reasons for many people. Do you have any 2020 reflections?
Yeah. It was also the year that I retired. So I was still working when we were all put into lockdown. But I retired at the end of April. And so I've been getting accustomed to retirement at the same time that we've all been getting accustomed to this very strange world that we're living in, have been living in right now. And of course, it's also been just a momentous year for the nation in so many ways. So in a way, I feel as though I was fortunate to have retired at this point because I could become sort of a great observer of the things that were going on this year. I partially kept a journal. I wish I had been more faithful about it because I would love to be able to go back and visit with that person who was living through that day by day. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this year about learning how to look inward again. And that's not just for me as a retired person, but I think all of us had to do that a good bit. The events that were taking place around us called for lots and lots of reflection. And I think that's been a healthy thing for us. I'll be interested to see how that plays out once we are all able to go out in the world again.
After we have our shots. Yeah. Jerome said I would be remiss if I did not talk about how we had bonded around Marilyn Robinson. As everyone listening probably knows, Marilyn Robinson wrote initially 3 books, a trilogy that has now segued to a quartet. And so when I read her blog, Esther's blog, I immediately thought of Gilead, which takes place in Iowa, as in Esther is from Iowa. And it talks a lot about the pull of home back to Iowa, as Esther was pulled back to Iowa. But it's a wonderful story of family and home and race.
Yep.
Across generations. And so Esther and I have pledged to talk about the 4th book, which is Jack, that she has read, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm looking forward to that conversation. As we close, Esther, is there something particular that you would like to share with the 1960s audience?
I would. And I'm going to give Grace the last word here. By reading a portion, with your permission, Faye.
Oh, please.
Reading a portion of one of those famous letters that she wrote. And this letter she wrote to one of my graduate school roommates who actually lost a very, very, very dear friend in the Vietnam War. And my parents knew her very well, and so this hit them hard as well when they heard of his death. And this letter, I didn't know about this letter until some years later when my friend sent it to me saying, as so many had, I came across this letter and I thought you would like to see it. This was written on Thanksgiving morning. The turkey was in the oven, relatives were going to be coming for dinner, and this is what my mother wrote. I come to this Thanksgiving with a heavy heart. Hartley and I were more moved than you will know by your letter yesterday. We had read Chris's letter to several friends, each time with a little prayer on my lips and in my heart that all of the Chris's of America might soon be taking their rightful place in making our country once again a strong nation, a place where families can grow up in peace and love, and where we can dare give a helping hand to the fallen on the street. Our generation is bequeathing you a world based on hypocrisy, selfishness, materialism, and unconcern for our fellow men. We are hoping that your generation, those of us in the 60s, with your realism and intelligence, will be able to right the wrongs we have allowed to grow and fester. I suppose I'm somewhat of a visionary, but it would seem to me if all this money being spent to bring added chaos to a small country could be used to right some of the inequality in our own country, we could allow Vietnam to solve their own civil war, and by bringing justice and pride in self to the people of our own country, we would be yielding the most effective weapon against communism, which breeds in areas of discontent and discomfort. Every day, I pray that the leadership of our country may rise above partisanship and image making and rise to the heights of greatness, which will allow for humility and concern and selflessness in directing our country's destinies. I will try to guard my own day-to-day living so that my actions don't give lie to my noble words.
Wow. I can see why you're so proud to be the daughter of Grace. Wonderful way for us to end. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this beyond words.
Me too, Faye.
couple of announcements before we get out of here. Because African Ancestry loves the 1960s Project so much. African Ancestry is offering a 5% discount to all of our listeners across the site, and that is good until June. Let me tell you what's coming up. Next week, the 1960s Project is going to have me back, and I'll be interviewing my friend Marilyn French Hubbard, and she's a friend of mine from Detroit. And she will talk about how back in the 1900s, before we had social media, she started the #1 networking movement for Black women called Black Women Entrepreneurs. And then I'll be away for a few weeks, and I will be back in May. And the founder of the Black Girl Collective will join me and the 1960s Project for a book discussion. We're going to be discussing the book called The Three Mothers by Anna Malika Tubbs, and it is about the mothers of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And everybody is encouraged to dust off their copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X, because in May, the 1960s Project will have several discussions about Malcolm X. And finally, on behalf of the 1960s Project, on behalf of What's on Jerome's Mind, on behalf of Dr. Esther Mackintosh and me, thank you so much for spending time with us, and we'll see you next week.